I saw Christopher Nolan's Odyssey on opening night and absolutely loved the movie. I'm a big fan of Christopher Nolan movies in general, and I walked away from the Odyssey with a feeling that it was one of his best. Now, I'm not sure where I rank it given I love so many of his movies, but it's only gotten better in memories. I've walked away from it, and I think it'll sit near the top of the Nolan movie list. One aspect of storytelling execution that stuck with me from the Odyssey is theme, and executing theme through plot and character without coming across as preachy or too on the nose. Theme is what makes a story more meaningful than simple surface level actions. If well executed for a plot, the scenes will explore thematic ideas present rather than mere random sequences. If well executed with character, it will intertwine the character's arc with the ideas of the theme and be integrated into the plot, and this makes a movie complex and deep. The symbiosis of plot, character, and theme make for an excellent story, and of those three elements, today I want to focus on theme. Nolan did this so well in the Odyssey because it was present in plot, character, and he explored the major theme from most angles in nearly every scene of the movie. So let's talk about the Odyssey as an example to make it more clear. And before I get into it, there will be spoilers, and I understand that some of the movie is not true to Homer's epic, but today I'm not arguing that here. I'm just going to look at theme through Christopher Nolan's Odyssey, not Homer's epic. So let's start by looking generally at theme and story, and then we'll bring it back to the Odyssey. A storyteller typically takes a stance on the central idea present in a story, and this is known as a thematic statement. The thematic statement takes a stance on an idea, and typically a character embodies that thematic statement. A character arc is essentially a protagonist learning the theme to solve a flaw that they have. So if a story were about the theme of love and loss, let's say, and the author takes a stance, it's better to have loved and lost than to not have loved. Then the story typically features a main character who needs to learn that, which means that they tend to take the opposite stance at the beginning. And through their journey and going through situations and rubbing up against other characters, and if it's a romance, maybe literally, characters with different stances on theme will be present through the story to help them learn the theme of the story. Now, arcs are a bit more complicated than that, and I'll have a story. I have a video coming out in the future on character arcs, specifically in Spider-Man's Brand New Day. So, if you're interested in that, then subscribe to watch that video. So, back to theme. So, in our example, let's say our main character's backstory is that she lost a father who she loved and had never gotten over it, and doesn't want to experience that loss in a man again, refusing to find love. So the complexity of the story and the characters increases to the extent that as a storyteller, you take different stances on that through story, which can be interlaid through other characters and themes or other plots and characters. So maybe, the character meets an older lady in some setting, right? Let's say a yoga class, and the older lady lived her life without forming any new bonds because she drew the same conclusion that after losing somebody and it hurt so much, she refused to form any bonds beyond surface level. And maybe through the story, our main character interacts with this older lady and maybe sees in her, it sees what she wants and that this older character has. But then as the story goes on, she sees that her life is truly lonely. Now, this then takes a stance and shows a potential avenue on the theme of love and loss. And the more complex a story decides to get around a theme, the deeper the story becomes. And it's also why I think one of the greatest skills of a storyteller is to be able to hold many conflicting opinions true at once. Like, I think the great skill of a storyteller is to not hold rigidly and ideologically to one opinion, but to be able to hold many opinions at once and as strong as possible on each of those, right? Like, not building up these weak arguments and then only one strong argument being the one that you truly think. Like, building up as strong possible an argument for each of those, each stance on the theme, and then seeing that play out through the story. Because I tend to be more heavily plot my stories, so I enter with a thematic statement. But every stance that I take on the theme, I have this rule for myself that if the characters and if the story seems like it should change based on how the story is going rather than how I've plotted it, I'll let that happen, because to me it's showing that certain ideas win when put up against another idea that same in that same realm of theme. So theme can take many forms, and I think the most captivating for an audience tends to be ideas that we as a society are having trouble grappling with on the micro and the macro, which is what I think Nolan did so brilliantly in this movie, and that I'll get into. One rule I developed for myself in my early 20s was to keep a keen eye as to what the major problems are of the collective by seeing the problems being dealt with by those around me and those I hear about. And the more prevalent I see a problem at the personal and individual level, the more likely it is that this is a vast collective problem. And that is where storytelling gold is found, because by exploring those themes and doing it really well, not only could you solve a psychological issue for you and the people around you, but you can create something of a behavioral map for others through story to help everybody sort of deal with this. And that's why I want to jump into the Odyssey. The primary theme of the movie is evident, and it's around the idea of Zeus's law. Now, Zeus's law is the unwritten Greek code of Xenia, which required hosts to provide food, shelter, safety to strangers under the protection of Zeus's Xenio. Essentially, the theme is about sort of hospitality, but if we take a broader view, right, it's no coincidence to me that this theme captivates, because Xenia is really a question of boundaries. Who are and aren't we obligated to let into the bounds of our home? And on the symbolic level is the psyche. And of course, on the literal level, this applies as well. Now, on the macro level, it's similar. Who do we invite into the boundary of our country and who don't we? This is a problem that is facing society and individuals alike. It's one thing that you can do by looking in the micro and the macro, and that's applying theme. Like you can see in our everyday lives. I feel like before the 2020s, the question and conversation of boundaries was quite rare, like about who we invited to our lives, who we keep out, and to what extent we interface with certain people in our life. Like it was barely a thought. Now it seems like people are setting boundaries with their parents, their roommates, their friends, their dogs, the monsters under their bed. And hey, don't get me wrong, this is a great thing. Especially if you're listening, Aunt Petunia, know for the fourth time I'm not interested in joining your pickleball team. Now, the naive move for a writer would be to say, okay, well, I think boundaries are all good or all bad. So let me make every scene of the movie someone inviting a stranger into their house and that stranger trying to murder them every time. Instead, Nolan takes Zeus's law and shows it on many different levels, like Penelope doing it for all the suitors, regardless of the fact that they're leeching and making a mockery of tradition. It's a show of a blind adherence to a tradition of hospitality, and her response to hospitality is that the tradition of hospitality shows no limits, regardless of how the people you're hospitable to respond. So there we get a response on theme, and it's an excellent function of story, because we as a viewer can see that you can let you can go too far in letting people within the bounds of your home. Now, how about on the other end? Through our main character, we move past the movie setup and see how Odysseus's incursion via the Trojan horse was an incursion into another city, sort of as a covert demonstration of an act of good faith, which was sort of hidden as an active an ultimate it was hidden as a sort of ultimate malice and betrayal, essentially. So then through the rest of the movie, Odysseus goes through various interactions in which we see a different take on Zeus's law, right? Entering someone's cave thinking that they will adhere to Zeus's law inherently, only to be greeted by a cyclops who could care less about divine law and he just eats the humans. Or Circe inviting them into her house but transforming them symbolically into the animal of which their true nature represents. Now, each has a different spin on Zeus's law, which we could dive into deeply, but we see that then by the end, you have a thematic revelation by Odysseus where he gives a speech to Penelope about his disdain with the way the people acted with Zeus's law, and that's why he didn't want to return. And there we have sort of a completion of an arc where the character has an inevitable change because of all the thematic interactions that they've had through the story. And this is why theme is so powerful, because between the fun plot elements, it it's an important emotional core to a story that allows a storyteller not to preach, but to genuinely explore an idea and come out on the other end having understood more about it and giving us, the consumer, a better understanding too. This is the mastery of theme because when done poorly, you can feel like you're being preached to. You can feel like you're being talked down to about how you ought to act, rather than simply being shown a story and all the different ways the theme can play out, so that the main character is battle hardened and shows us the inevitability of what the character thinks after having gone through that. And if you come out of a story and it seems like there's more to the theme, more to the idea to be explored, it's probably because a lot of the time there is. And that's why stories with excellent theme are thought provoking and conversation starting, since it can have people trying to find new angles or enhance angles a storyteller didn't see, or maybe vehemently oppose the theme that maybe popular movie might be espousing. And I see this happening with the Odyssey. Like, people online are arguing about the thematic revelation by Odysseus at the end and what it meant, and whether it's justified for him to blame himself on the Trojan horse and the evils of mankind through a breaking of divine law, or whether it was necessary given the war was started by Paris taking Helen back to Troy and breaking Zeus's law first. To which one could then argue it's implied that Agamemnon really went to the war for the trade routes and Helen was an excuse to launch the war. And regardless of the outcome of that argument, I do think it shows the thought provoking nature of a well executed theme. And even the greatest storytellers of all time might miss things that come to light as time progresses. And to the extent they don't, is one of the reasons that there is a survivability of a story. So if you want to read stories with themes that look at preeminent issues in interesting ways with fun plot elements and complex characters, subscribe here where I will not only talk about these things further, but where I write stories of my own that will integrate these ideas which you can buy in the future. So thank you for listening, and I hope you enjoyed, everybody. Take care.